like that's just a piece of the puzzle. So there's things that, I don't know, maybe you don't get along with your dad about something, and so it's going to be hard to bring up a topic that's maybe a little bit more sensitive. um,
Hey guys, Sarita Edwards here. Welcome to another episode of the Being Rare podcast. So, October is National Family History Month. This is a great time to talk about our family history and really make sure our family stories are present and relevant to how we live our lives today. Specifically for today's conversation, we want to talk about family health history and why it's so important for us to talk about our family's overall health. Joining me for today's conversation is Maria Della Rocca, Senior Director of Patient Services at Global Genes, and Molly Martzke, Senior Program Manager with the National Genetics Education and Family Support Center at Expecting Health. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Being Rare podcast.
Thank you, Sarita.
Pleasure to be here. Having us.
I have had conversations with both of you. Just from varying degrees about the importance of knowing your family's health. And we know that for some cultures, your personal health history is private. It's something that you don't openly talk about, which creates challenges when it comes to trying to understand your family health history. Um, I guess I really want to just kind of start the conversation, right there. Why do you think having those conversations are so taboo as just different cultures? Why do we not talk about our family health history enough? What do you think?
I think one of the things that comes to, it's the different feelings that people experience when talking about those more sensitive topics, right? So there may be a sense of shame, a sense of fear, also mistrust, right? We know that there's history behind, sharing that type of information and how certain groups have been targeted. So that mistrust is there from the community. So I think, those are the sorts of feelings that I've heard from others who have kind of hesitated to be open about that type of information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do you think, Molly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, but I think it's also, you have to look at it within the context of your family itself. So sometimes I think, right, like that's just a piece of the puzzle. So there's things that, I don't know, maybe you don't get along with your dad about something, and so it's going to be hard to bring up a topic that's maybe a little bit more sensitive. People have all different views about how they feel about their health history and their responsibility, and actually what they want to know or when they want to know it. So I think that plays into it, as well as, I, again, speaking even just from my own family, I think things have happened throughout the years that it was almost just sort of implied that people knew what was going on, but we really didn't know, because nobody said the words. Nobody said, oh, we have mental health problems, or, we have mental health issues in our family, but nobody really brought that up or talked about it that way. It would be just like, oh, that's how so and so is. And so yeah, so again, I think it's just super complex, and it brings up our own individual feelings as part of where we stand within that family and our relationship with them, as well as others, how they feel about it. So it can be really hard.
Yeah, I think, one thing that Maria said that I think really plays a huge part in it is that whole mistrust piece. I think a lot of times when you think about just overall mistrust for, the healthcare system, different reasons that you might mistrust a family member. I think that plays directly into, kind of Molly, what you were just saying, just that whole I think they're interchangeable. I think because I mistrust, it makes me not want to talk about different things. I think too, there's this sense of judgment, especially when you talk about different things like mental health or um, alcoholism or those type of health histories that we know can impact the family that's coming behind you. But I do think, I do think it's both. I think it's that mistrust of what is somebody going to do with this information, even in my family.
Right.
And then two, that judgment piece of, being so vulnerable about what you have going on. That's a really, really good perspective from both. And I just see how they both tie hand in hand. Um, I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of bring up, I know that you guys both represent, organizations, but your views, your opinions are your own. In that though, why is it so important, that we have these conversations? And I think just across the board, more and more organizations are making it a priority to help navigate these conversations for families. Why do you think that is? Is it just the time that we're in? A lot of things have been heightened post-pandemic, or what is it about now that this is such a priority?
I think for me, what comes to mind, Sarita, is like you said, I mean, part of it too is coming off of the pandemic, right? And how, yes, health disparities have been around forever, but, seem to have come more to light during COVID, and the differences from the communities and how they experienced that whole pandemic and what that looked like within their communities and their chances of catching COVID and how they were treated and everything. So I think, knowing your family history is kind of one of those ways to get closer to closing that health disparity gap that we see, right? Because if you know and understand the importance of the family history, then it's not just beneficial for that individual, but it's beneficial for your family, for those that come after you, for your community as a whole.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Marla, did you want to chime in there too?
Yeah, I do think it's one of those things that has been talked about for years. It's not, like you said, why is the time now? It's sort of been that idea of, people have talked about the importance of health history, but I think it's one of those issues that has sort of bubbled up, like Maria kind of talked about. And again, I like to hope um, as a community, as a nation, that we really are starting to open up and have some more of those difficult conversations and really talk about some of the work and how we can move that forward. So family health history is just a piece of that. And I think organizationally, we think we need to lead by example as far as, bringing those conversations that we feel that are important and bringing those to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to stay right here for just a second, just talking about just coming off the pandemic and how a lot of things have kind of surfaced, things that we know folks have had challenges and issues with anyways, but following a pandemic, we see, kind of like Maria was just saying, we see the disparities. They're we knew that they were present, but it's more apparent. Um, when I think about the pandemic, I think about someone in my family who had COVID, and their experience with COVID revealed so many health conditions that nobody knew that they had. It wasn't until they were stricken with COVID that, and we had to have conversations with the doctor, that it was like, okay, so did you know about this? And did you know about this? And did you know? And everybody was like, no, I didn't know about this. Or, maybe one person said, oh yeah, I knew about this. I had heard about it. Like, do you think that's a good thing? I think COVID surfaced for us because it made us aware of something that we did not know about that family member. But two, that delayed communication and how we may not have ever known that about the family member had they not gotten COVID. So I want us to just kind of talk about that. Identifying something unexpectedly. Like, I don't think there was an intentional,
Mhm.
um, it wasn't intentional that we found that out. We just happened to because of COVID.
Well, so I guess for me, right? So like I think back, and again, to me, it's sort of like in this world that we live in, we're supposed to do all these things, eat right, talk about family health history, exercise, do your work, do all of that. And so it's sort of like where that bubbles up as a priority, right? And so I think some of us that really start to look at that and think about family health history and where that fits in our priorities of talking about or learning more about and stuff like that is usually when we discover something unexpected. So it usually happens, again, you go to the doctor and they're like, hey, I noticed you have, you know, this murmur in your heart. Do you know anybody else in your family? And so then, right. So then you like go, I don't know, maybe my Uncle Joe did or whatever, right? And so then you call
Right.
up, you go home and you call some of your relatives or you text somebody like, hey, do you know, they just found this. Like, do we have this? They asked if it runs in the family. And then, of course, then all of a sudden it bubbles up and it seems like, again, like, oh yeah, so and so had that. So you're like, well, how did I not know
Eh,
that? Right.
right. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's honestly when this family health history starts to bubble up is when it becomes a priority for you or you learn something. And so then that's where it is. And I think part of our hope with this discussion, at least my hope, is that maybe we can get to the point where we don't have to wait till we discover something, that we can be a little more proactive about it, that it
Mm-hmm.
isn't that just, oh, here's this, do you know anybody else, because we think there might be a link, but it's really that more like, oh, I know high blood pressure runs in the family, so I really want to be proactive about that. I know breast cancer runs in my family. I really
Mm-hmm.
want to be sure I'm aware of that, and
Mm-hmm.
get my additional screenings or talk to my doctor.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I mean, I think it's those conversation starters, right? It's usually when there's an incidental finding and or when, oh, did you hear that so and so has this? Or even the celebrities, like this year, how many different celebrities have been diagnosed with a rare disease, right? I mean, there was
Mm-hmm.
Justin Bieber with Ramsey Hunt, there's Halsey with Ehlers-Danlos, and Venus Williams with Sjogren's. So all of these things can be conversation starters, so you don't have to necessarily wait until you or someone within your family has been diagnosed with something or is
Mm-hmm.
suspected of having some sort of diagnosis that might put them at a higher risk of developing a disease. So I agree with Molly wholeheartedly. I think, we need to kind of identify ways where we can be proactive about having those conversations so that we can take the necessary measures, that are available, whether it is lifestyle change, whether it is, preventative screenings, all of that will put us, in a place where either we can prevent developing those diseases or delaying when those diseases present themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Really, really great perspective. I want to just shift a little bit and talk about stigma. We know, kind of, Molly, what you were saying earlier, just about like mental health and um, different challenges. We know that, again, it comes with that whole mistrust, that feeling of being judged and everything. But just talking about the stigma that a lot of illnesses, when it comes to health, um, stigma is associated with a lot of different things, like mental health, but also, I'm just going to use alcoholism. I think I've shared with both of you in conversation how that's something that existed in my direct family, on my father's side of the family. But I never heard anybody use the word alcoholic. I never heard anybody, just call it for what it is. And I think that that's a barrier when it comes to really trying to um, stay in front of family health and just the impact that it has on everybody in the family. So what are your thoughts when it comes to just stigma and how can we remove the stigma that's associated with so many different illnesses, um, that may prevent people from wanting to talk about family health, just over across the board, family health, but but talking about it means we have to expose and bring to light what the family know is present. They just don't want to say.
Yeah, so I think it's super hard, right? Because I think there is this idea of stigma, but there is also this not an idea, but there's really um an individual's privacy. So it's part of that, like we want to be able to talk about it, but you don't also want somebody to be talking about someone. Just like, again, I have, my kids have a genetic condition, and so to me, it's one thing to be informative about something versus like talking about it and negatively and sort of adding to that stigma. So it's really about that word choice and maybe that platform and that way that we're talking about things. So again, so if we know that it's sensitive subject potentially in our family, knowing, some of these that do have some of those bigger stigmas, whether it's alcoholism, mental health, some of that type of stuff, I think there's a time and a place. Maybe like Christmas dinner where like 30 people are sitting around the table. That might not be the right time, right?
Sure.
It's sort of like maybe talking to somebody one-on-one and saying, hey, I'm trying to collect this. This is why I'm trying to find out that information, and really being about why you're trying to talk about that, and make it more about from you and your perspective versus being about an individual or what they may or may not have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think timing is important. I think the setting is important. You're going to have, like, Molly said, there are going to be some people that are going to feel more comfortable with the face-to-face discussion, some over the phone, some might want to communicate, over email or Zoom. So it's really keeping in mind what is going to make them feel comfortable and opening up. And also sharing success stories, right? There are success stories for these different diseases and conditions, and being able to talk about those so that we're not necessarily only portraying them in a negative light.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then how do we have those conversations um, when when it's when it's not necessarily about privacy, it's more so about denial.
Mm.
This is not what's happening. This is not what I'm experiencing. This is not what it is. How do we have those conversations when we don't want to accept it for what it truly is? Do we just avoid them? Do we try to figure out another way to do it? I mean, like, how do we talk about those?
So, I mean, I think there are different, Molly mentioned this, there are different factors. There's complex factors that come into play. So timing is key, and then respecting too when people might be ready to talk about it versus not. And then also identifying, are there other members within the family that, you can tap into and be part of the conversation, who might be able to persuade others to make them feel more open. Like, I can tell you a little bit, like within the Hispanic population, they tend to, include older relatives in the conversation, and because they're respected and they're often consulted. And then, within the African American community, there may be, grandmothers and mothers who are, or other members maybe of the community, extended family, who can come in, and also people trust, again, back to that trust. I think is key to really getting people to open up. But again, respecting that the timing is really key for when people may feel like they can start feeling comfortable talking about these complicated topics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a way to do it too, right? So there's lots of tools out there that have been developed. So they can be questionnaires. You could sit around at Thanksgiving dinner or a meal and fill some of them out. And then some of it, we have to just accept as human beings that it's not going to be perfect. We're not going to know our entire family history. We're going to have people who aren't going to want to tell us things that, might be relevant even, or you might not know what your family history is, because again, maybe, you're in a situation where you were adopted, or you're not with your biological family. So there is that, but I always have taken that. So again, so even if there isn't a known something, I do talk to my doctor about some things, and I say, you know what, it's never been diagnosed, but we suspect, or there has been, again, physicians know this, healthcare providers, they know that you don't have, everybody's medical records and all of their diagnosis, but I talk about it in context to me. So again, when I was, really struggling during the COVID pandemic with mental health. And so I talked about, it's never been diagnosed, but these are some of the stories I've heard about some family members. So I suspect that there's some family history there about stuff. So again, so I put it on me and what I was bringing to it and how it related to me. And again, explain it it wasn't definitive. It was, but this is what I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sarita, if I could also add, I think that Global Genes, in partnership with the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition, created videos and tools, both English and Spanish, to assist in these types of discussions. So like Molly's point, that there are tools. And one of the blogs that we actually created is How to Talk to Your Family, that kind of addresses that. Here are some tips on what you can do to have those difficult conversations. So, I think that leaning on those can be very helpful too, as you're trying to broach these topics.
I think that's a really good point. And we'll make sure to put that in the description too, to our listening audience, so you can have a direct link to the Global Genes website. I think my very first thought when I was thinking of that question to ask about, how do you have those conversations, especially when a person is in denial? My very first thought was, when you see like TV shows and different things like interventions and different things, and how it could be really, really difficult for the person because everybody is kind of swarming them at the same time. And so that's why I really wanted to make sure to, get your perspective about having these conversations. They're going to be difficult, for some families. It's not going to be just a sit down, let's talk about it, and everybody's going to be open and willing to share, and you got your pen and your paper. Some conversations are going to be super, super difficult. But you still have to approach them like you've both said, with just respect and grace and tact, and not make a person feel like they're being attacked or exposed for whatever reason. Because believe it or not, I believe that a lot of people who are experiencing challenges, I think a lot of them think they're doing it privately, but people know more than they think.
Yeah.
I think about different health conditions with people in my family that I don't believe they know people realize that they're experiencing it. Something too you talked about, Molly, I think that really stood out to me was just, when it becomes personal. I think honestly, you both talked about it. When it becomes personal, that's when it really becomes a priority. I had a hysterectomy back in July, and just telling my mom that I needed to have it opened up a door of conversation. And I learned, about, oh, well, and, your grandma. And like, I learned so much from me just sharing my personal experience. But that was one of the first questions that my doctor asked, had anybody else had it? And so it wasn't something that we had talked about previously. So, I'm glad that I'm, for the most part, transparent and don't mind, don't mind sharing a little bit to kind of get the conversation going.
And
So
Sarita, I think it was great. One of the things that you mentioned too was that, after you had that conversation with your family members, you sat your own daughter down.
Yeah.
So, which is great. Right then and there, you did a great service to your daughter and to your future, grandchildren and, descendants. So that's amazing.
Thank you. I did. I think being more aware about the importance of having those conversations, it makes me more intentional, to include my children and what we have going on. And and honestly, they're kind of nosy too. Like, they'll say stuff like, what are you going to the doctor for?
Yeah.
Why does your arm hurt? Or different things. They'll ask those questions. And I think you have to be okay and comfortable with answering those questions, and of course sharing as much as you want to. But being, being comfortable saying, like, I preface and say, okay, so this is girl stuff, to my boys. Like, this is girl stuff. Like, are you sure you want to know?
Mhm.
And they'll say yes or no, or yeah, it just depends on them. But I think you have to be okay with sharing. And I think that's a place that I'm in now. I just really, really try to be intentional with making sure they know, um, so they can plan for their own futures. And so that leads me to, one of our final thoughts is just really the importance of family health history when it comes to just legacy. Um, and because I believe it's the blueprint. The family before you is your blueprint, and then you've added a little architecture to it, and now that's your family's blueprint. What are your thoughts about legacy, the importance of family health history in terms of being proactive, as you prepare for your own family?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, what do y'all think about that?
Do you want to go first, or I can?
Oh, you can go first, Mom. Sorry.
It's like, yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because I think that, and again, somebody who has kids with genetic conditions, that, it really is this idea that is their legacy, but it's not their whole being, right? So it really is that's a piece of them. It's a piece of our family. It's a piece of our family history, but it's not predetermined for what outcomes are or what that future looks like. So I think even as we talk about all of this and health history and all of that, it's keeping it in context with what does life look like and what does that journey look like. And just because it's might be genetic doesn't mean, again, that's predetermines what outcomes look like. That knowing that information isn't good or bad, it's just information, really.
Yeah.
And so it's what you do with that, so that, again, like I said, so I almost, that's a hard question for me, because I want to say, like, oh yeah, like, pass it, you know what I mean, but I also want to say, like, keep that in perspective, that it's just a piece of you. It doesn't determine who you are or what you're meant to be, to this world, or who your descendants and all of that. So
Yeah, I agree with Molly. I mean, I think that's, for some conditions, it just means you're at an increased risk, but it doesn't mean it's your destiny, right?
Yeah.
It's not your destiny. Therefore, yes, and how family history can increase your chance, can determine what your chances might be of developing a disease, but how little and how much that all comes into play. There's so many other factors, right, that we have to think about. We have to think about environment. We have to think about diet. We have to think about so many different things that come into play. So really understanding what, for instance, for me, I know I have a family history of high blood pressure. I have a family history of diabetes. So these are the sorts of things that, as I'm making choices about what am I going to eat, then I'm, careful about that, mindful of that. I also make sure that I'm having my screenings, am I going in for my annual checkup? Am I having my glucose levels checked? All of that, so that if I need to make any changes, I can hopefully catch it early. So again, it's not my destiny, but and for some, it feels great to be able to say I have a little bit of control, and it's not that this is my sentence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I love how you guys both phrased it. Like, it's information. It's not a definite outcome. It's just, it's information that I can use as I live my life. We're actually going to have another conversation with two panelists, and they're going to be talking about that family perspective. And just like you said, Maria, one of them, she was actually able to have a procedure done because she had a family history of something, and she was able to present that. I'm going to let her share that story. So if you are watching this episode, make sure to tune in for that next one to hear more about that. But but yeah, I think that's a really, really good takeaway. And I think that's something that that we can close on. Family health history is an opportunity to have conversations and know different things that may be happening in your family, just individual bodies. It's information, it's conversation, but it's not your destiny. I love that. It's not a predetermined, this is what you're going to do or have. It's just an opportunity to be aware. So I want to thank you both for hanging out with us, and for being a part of today's episode. If you enjoyed today's content, please make sure to share it with a colleague or a friend. And we are talking about family health history, so please make sure to share it with a family member. Until the next episode, you guys be rare.